Hello, everyone. As we're going deeper into our study on what the future holds for us and what sort of careers will open up, I'm thrilled to have with us Dr. James Green, a distinguished American physicist and esteemed former chief scientist for NASA, whose illustrious career spans over 4 decades of groundbreaking contributions to space exploration and scientific research. He graduated with a PhD in space physics from the prestigious University of Iowa, and then embarked on a remarkable journey that would shape the course of space science history. He joined NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in 1980, quickly rising through the ranks and spearheaded pioneering initiatives and revolutionized the space of physics and space physics. Additionally, his profound impact on space science has been immortalized through the naming of asteroid 25913 in his honor. This is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm very envious that you have an asteroid in your name. He stands as a beacon of inspiration for aspiring scientists and space enthusiasts worldwide. He's also the chairman of Metavisionaries, an organization that provides access to space and frontier technologies. And I had the privilege of listening to him through a webinar that Metavisionaries had organized. And I was just really impressed by Metavisionaries and their vision to educate people about what's going on in space and the kind of technologies that are now being implemented for space exploration. We're going to talk a lot about that. But before that, Dr. Green, firstly, thank you so much for the commendable work you've done in your space.
Well,
very few people get to live a life where they dedicate all their energy and effort towards others. And I really think you stand as an inspiration for that. And thank you so much for having this conversation.
Well, it's my very great pleasure to talk to you about what we knew, what we've been doing, what we expect to do. And the more people that understand what's happening in this sector, the better. You know, as this image here shows, where we have a view of our planet immersed in a cloud, that cloud of knowledge, and we're pointing outward and we're looking into space. And in space, so many things are important. The species, our species on this earth will not survive very long if we don't go into space. Now that means using our missions to observe the earth, to monitor how our resources are being managed, going into space to live and work on the moon, where resources are available that we're going to need. Give you a perfect example. Our phones, our computers, so many things that we have today require certain types of materials. These are called precious metals. Precious metals are being mined here on Earth, but in the next 50 to 200 years, we will be out of precious metals. But those precious metals are also in objects on asteroids, but also on the moon. Mm-hmm. So there'll be resources on the moon that in your lifetime, as astronauts live and work on the moon, and this is starting now within NASA, and many other countries are joining. China is moving out in this direction too, who recently launched another mission to the moon. We're going to learn more about how to use our nearest neighbor, and that will be a big, huge step as humans move into space. But that's just the start.
Dr. Green, how does that happen? Like who owns the planet, who owns the moon, and therefore who owns these resources?
The humanity on the surface of this planet, humans, basically own the moon. All of us. No one country owns the moon. We go into the space for the betterment of humanity. And this is so important. You know, as for instance, our Earth science satellites, and we have them, and many countries have them, as they fly over a country early in the growing season, they can determine how much land is under cultivation. Mm-hmm. What are you growing? The soil moisture of the soils, and therefore they can calculate how much food you will produce. And already before the end of the growing season, we'll know whether you're going to import or export food. Mm-hmm. And these are important things for every country to know. This helps the whole community, international community, and how countries work together to be able to then survive on this planet, live and grow, and then also have opportunities to go into space. You
Okay.
know, we're developing all kinds of things in space because space is a new environment. It's not only a thing for astronauts. You know, many tourists now have gone into space,
Okay.
and I
Wait,
think what we're going to see.
let's get, I want to talk about space tourism. Let me understand this resource since you raised such an
Sure,
important topic.
it is.
What sort of resources are we looking at when you're saying, you know, the metal used in your phone? What all do you potentially think you can discover on the moon or on other planets?
So for the moon, the approach to going to the moon and being able to look for resources like these precious metals, and then be able to live on the moon and work on the moon, that concept is moving ahead. That's going to be happening over the next several decades. As we learn to live and work on the moon, we'll then have the ability to go to Mars. And some of the things that we do on the moon, we'll do on Mars. And this, so the learning process is a step: going to the moon, learning to live and work in space, and then going to Mars. So
Okay.
as the species begins to really explore our solar system, we have to take it in steps.
Okay.
Now, what's on the moon that's important? Well, there are platinum group metals. The moon, actually, everything on the moon is also on Earth. But as we use our resources, then need these additional metals and many other things like that, then we have to step out to get them.
Okay. Okay. And when you said, you know, nobody owns the moon, right? Nobody owns Mars,
Yes,
and nobody really owns any of these planets, or even like I'm assuming outside of the atmosphere, nobody really owns patches of, I don't know, space.
yes,
In the future, though, do you see countries waging a space war where they say, hey, you know, we got here first and this territory is now ours? Because if you're saying it's going to become a resource heavy exploration, the minute you have resource, then you have money, and then you have
yes.
obviously land grabbing. So is that going to happen?
No.
No. Okay.
And the reason why, yes, and the reason why I say that is that it started in 1967 with what's called the Outer Space Treaty.
Okay.
And in that Outer Space Treaty, and nearly every country in the world signed it. And so in that Outer Space Treaty, the space was to be used for peaceful purposes. Space is where we all learn to live and work together. And since 1967, that is exactly what's happened. You know, we've had more than a dozen countries work on building the International Space Station. Look at all the astronauts that are there. And in some cases here on Earth, there's huge conflicts going on between certain countries. But in space, even those countries are working together. Space is harsh. It's a hard environment. And everyone that goes into that environment works together for their survival. They become a team. Now, when you become a team and you rely on individuals, no matter where they're from, no matter what culture they're from, no matter their background, their political orientation, once that team comes together, there begins to become an understanding of each other. And that understanding is the foundation for peace. So space has always been the great uniter.
Wow.
Even during the Cold War, space scientists on both sides, in the United States and in the former Soviet Union, worked together.
Mhm.
The countries recognized, you know, on the other side of whatever's going to happen during the Cold War, we need a foundation to reestablish our relationship in a
Mhm.
peaceful manner. So long as everyone agrees to and continues to use the Outer Space Treaty, we have a foundation for peace.
Okay.
This is
Wow.
why it's so exciting.
Wow, this is very interesting to learn. It seems like a perfect utopia outside of this planet. If what you're saying is true, and if what you're saying remains true, then I think we have a lot of hope for the future. Okay,
We
so
do.
as per you, the geopolitics of sort of planet Earth, once you leave these sort of boundaries, they sort of cease to exist almost. Okay, great.
Correct. There's a new foundation that everyone works with, and so there's no nuclear weapons that are launched into space. There's a mutual benefit to countries, all countries, by going into space. The data I was talking about of a satellite flying over a country, any country can get data that NASA has to do these kind of resources and analysis. So the more we can teach countries and their population about space, the better. So becoming space aware, I think, is a critical element of a person's education for the future, whether they're in space or not. They need to know what's happening in space and how that affects their lives, and it's affecting it big time.
Okay, let's talk about that. How
Sure.
if I'm like a 16-year-old high school kid, how is this knowledge going to help me, and why do I need to know this for my 20s and my 30s?
Well, that individual, that young adult, is using space many times in their own individual life, whether they know it or not. If they have a cell phone and they need to go or navigate to one place to another, that navigation comes from satellites in space. And that network provides a tremendous ability for countries to work together, because it provides navigation of ships from one place to another, not just navigation of your son or daughter to the grocery store or to a restaurant you've never been to, but that's just one of so many things. When they eat food, that food is a certain price based on what it took to get it to market, and space enables the efficiency to get it to market by going through the process of growing. When farmers mow and create their rows and plant, what they do is they use space to navigate and make their rows perfect, and to utilize all aspects of the land and get more bushels per acre, which then translates to cheaper food and access. So there's just so many things like that are going on.
Okay, all right. Okay, so convincing that everybody needs to know a little bit about what's going on.
Yep.
So we've spoken a little bit about resources that might get discovered in the future. You're saying that the resources do exist. You still seem to be a
Yes.
believer in no wars once the resources are discovered, or it's not like the movies, right? Where they suddenly discover like, oh, this planet has all these resources, and then everyone's trying to make a grab for it. You
True.
don't see that happening.
I don't, and that's because we have learned to work together since the space program began. Since the Outer Space Treaty in 1967, we're talking about 60 or 70 years now, right?
Mm.
So what's happened over that time period has been a wonderful explosion into space. We have an international space station with so many countries that have contributed to it, and so many countries that have been sending astronauts where they live and work together. And now we're moving into an environment where commercial entities, these are companies, are building space stations to go into space. Well, what are they doing? Well, they're providing an environment to do a variety of research. And this research is developing drugs. In space, you actually develop better pharmaceuticals, better drugs. The lattice is perfect. There's no gravity that messes up the lattice. Therefore, you don't take as much to be effective. to have an effective drug. You know, we all take drugs that are manufactured on Earth, and we're actually taking more than we need because it has to do the job. Because the lattice, the actual structure of the drug, is imperfect. And so consequently, you want to be able then to develop capabilities that improve our life here on Earth. And that's just one example. Other examples are in space, the body is struggling to adapt to no gravity, okay? All systems are affected. Some things happen fast in space to our bodies, some things happen slow. That gives us an opportunity to study them in the right way. So you may have heard that from very early on, when astronauts have been in space, one of the things that happens very quickly is they start losing their bone strength. Now, the reason why is your body constantly builds bone and replaces the bone in your structure. This is how you grow. This is how, you know, the body functions. So there's a part of it that leaches bone out, and a part of it, a process that puts bone in. And what's been happening in space is the body says, well, I don't need the bone, so I don't put any bone in. So the body is leaching calcium out of the bone and making the bone weaker. This is exactly what happens in aging. It's a process that occurs in men and women, more so in women as they grow older. And so drugs were developed to inhibit that, to then replace the bone. And those drugs then are everywhere in the market. So this has been a huge benefit. Now, the reason why these drugs were rapidly developed, because in space, it happens very quickly. In a matter of days, you're losing bone. Here on Earth, if you were to do the same study, you would be giving trial drugs to your sample, your men and your women, and say, well, come back in 3 months and we'll see what effect it's had. So the time scale is so fast in space that we can do these kind of things. Okay. And that's been one of the big hallmarks in some of the drug. Other things happen more slowly. Osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, the ability, you know, for inflammation in your joints hurting. Those are kind of things that also are part of the aging process. And in that, what we're finding out is that process happens slower in space. And so now certain experiments are being devised to take a look at that. Are there some things that we can do, or what are some drugs that we can apply? And so it provides an environment to do all kinds of medical research.
Okay. That's fascinating. You know, how is the technology? I want to split technology into tech and AI, and within technology, tell me a bit about like the hardware. You know, you've been in the space for very long. How is the hardware itself evolving? You know, what's going on with all the rockets and all that stuff? Like where is that going to move to first? Just the plain simple hardware.
All right. So to get into space, you need a rocket. And it turns out many companies are building rockets that make it much easier to get in space. Now, the more you put in space, the more expensive it is because you have to lift it. This is also the reason why you want to go to the moon, because if there's resources on the moon you can use, you don't have to bring it. You can use those resources. All right. So the more we know about where we're going and what we're doing, the less we bring. And all we need to do then is to turn those resources into things that we need. And so consequently, many of these companies now are providing rapid access to space. That enables some new ideas to crop up. One new idea is building space stations by companies to do not only research, but for space tourism. You know, the concept of living in space for a couple weeks, you know, whether you're going on your honeymoon or it's something you want to do or do frequently, you visit space like you visit your favorite town
Do you
or
really see this happening? Do you really see this happening? Like,
yeah,
yes. Is it going to be just
yeah.
privy to like the ultra Silicon Valley type people, or is this, do you really see this getting commercialized to some extent?
Yes, there are several companies building space stations with the intent of having visitors. People come, live, and work. Space tourism has started many years ago. There were several people that went into space, even got on the space station. Commercial astronauts are on space station. So this is going to be a trend that will continue. It won't stop. There's no reason to stop it. You have much more rapid access to space. You have a huge number of people that want to go, and it's a tremendous experience.
Okay.
So that will happen.
How are they doing, like who's regulating all this stuff? You said it doesn't belong to you, it doesn't belong to me. Can anyone just go set up a space station? Can anyone set up a hotel? Like who's regulating this space? Who are the policymakers around this stuff?
Well, policymakers are all over the place. Okay, there's many space lawyers.
Space
Space
lawyers.
law, yes.
Okay.
Space law is extremely important because there's a foundation in the Outer Space Treaty that they build on.
Okay.
All right. And so this is a very important topic. Now, countries that work together have their space lawyers work together. They recognize who's going to do what, and then what benefits come from that, and how that's shared, not only between those countries, but with other countries. NASA has a capability as they develop things, they develop technologies that they turn over to companies to then commercialize. And those things are all over the place. And so does many of the other agencies. Space is so important that many countries now are starting their own space agency. I mean, there's like 192 or 95 countries in the world.
Yeah.
More than 70 now are in space, and most of them are moving towards creating their own space agency. Okay. Now, India was one of the early new space agencies besides NASA in the United States and the Russian Space Agency in Russia. Okay. But think about what's happening. Germany and the European Space Agency's got 30 countries involved, and there's a space agency in Brazil and Portugal. You just begin to look at the world, and the world is becoming space aware. This is why the population needs to become space aware.
Okay.
Not only the benefits.
What do these agencies do? Like who's in this agency, and like what does the agency do?
Well, let's pick one of the new space agencies, like UAE. It's a new space agency. They have an Earth science satellite. That is something that looks at resources in the Middle East. They also had developed a mission that has gone to Mars, and it's orbiting Mars right now. It's actually a Mars weather satellite. And they're interested in many more missions, not only cooperation with other agencies in terms of working together, but really wanting their agency to grow. They're interested in getting their population, these young kids in high school and going into college, educated in the aerospace industries such that they can hire them. So one, space is exploding in the world in many different countries. Two, to become space aware and then space educated. You say, this is a field I want to get into. I want to build satellites. I want to build some sort of experiment that goes into space and we learn something important, and then get involved and do it. And so what we're going to find out is many more countries are turning towards space education activities. And this is one of the things that the Metavisionaries do, and that is we teach space. We teach space for young adults, from 13 to 20 or so in age, and we do it in a way that's right up there with the latest activities in
So what
space,
are you
because we
teaching?
do it in the metaverse.
What are you teaching? What are you teaching? Like, what are some of the skills? If I were interested in your space, what should I know? What are some of the skills that you would think that are sort of essential skills?
A couple things. The first thing is we have to introduce the subject in a very broad way so that students recognize what's going on. So we teach satellite applications. We teach about what do we learn from space about the Earth, and how do we use that to manage Earth resources. Okay, so that's part of the awareness. What are we doing in space in planetary science? How do we manage resources on Earth by learning what's happening on the planets? And that's been going on for decades. What's happened on Venus can happen on Earth. What's happening on Mars can happen on Earth. So when we orbit them and we see what's happening, that actually affects our knowledge about how the Earth will evolve over time, and enables us then to start thinking about or even using that knowledge in a productive way. For instance, one of the major layers in our upper atmosphere is called ozone. It's 3 molecules of oxygen that the 3 atoms of oxygen that come together in a molecule. Very important because, and it sits in a layer of 20 kilometers, it absorbs the ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light is incredibly harsh on life. You can easily get skin cancer quite quickly develop by being exposed to intense ultraviolet light that the sun puts out, our own sun. And then it wreaks havoc with plants and vegetation. So the ozone is critical to maintain life here on Earth. Well, there was a time in the 1980s we found out that the ozone was being destroyed.
Yeah.
Well, how did that happen?
Hmm.
We learned immediately by planetary scientists who had written many papers about the destruction of ozone on Venus by chlorine.
By chlorine, okay.
And so by chlorine. And so all of a sudden we started looking at, well, is there chlorine in our atmosphere? How did it get there? Well, it turns out, yeah, it's in a compound called CFC, chlorofluorocarbon. And the first C is CFC is chlorine. And we make it. And we put it in all kinds of stuff. We put it in hairspray, we put it in our air conditioner. And it was a trace gas. You could hardly see it's a very small amount in our atmosphere that was escaping, and we were making it like crazy. But what it does is it goes up, starts destroying the ozone, breaks up this molecule, and allows the ultraviolet light to come in.
And we learned from Venus, huh? We
learned that from we learned that from Venus. We learned that from Venus. So what happened? Space lawyers got together and we created an international treaty to ban the making of CFC so we can heal the ozone. And that's just one of many things like that we've been doing.
Okay, wow. Okay. So you told me a little bit about technology and sort of this launch of lots of companies, launch of new rockets, which will probably bring down the marginal cost of travel to space if there's just more supply of these rockets. What is happening in the AI aspect of it? How much AI is being used? I'm assuming a lot because it's so data heavy. Being like miles and miles of distance and data. So can you share how AI is helping space exploration?
You bet. So I'll give you many examples from NASA. So a couple decades ago, in the early 2000s, we had 2 spacecraft two rovers landed on Mars, Spirit and Opportunity. And we had, Mars has nearly at the same time in terms of what one day is, but not quite. So it's like 23 hours and 20 minutes. And so, or 30 minutes. So each day it changes a little bit. So we had controllers on Mars time, where they're working and communicating with the rovers, and it was really hard to do. And if you're trying to move the rover, you really struggled to do that. So they finally decided that, hey, we need to have some AI software. We need to have intelligence in the rover. We need to let the rover make its own decisions in moving. So that what we want is, we want to go to bed at night when it's day on Mars, and we want to tell the rover, tomorrow when I come in 8 hours, I want you here, okay? And you go move. And so, wow, that's a big responsibility for a rover. Okay, so they started to develop these technologies. So the next big one was Curiosity. Another huge rover. Well, that's the size of a big car. And then Perseverance, another one, the size of a big car. So these rovers indeed have their own intelligence, and they're told, we want you at a location, you go there. Now, why isn't that just no big deal? Well, the big deal is sometimes there's dust in craters, and you can go into that area and then collapse in. Your wheels can spin. You can roll over really hard rocks and break your wheel. And all those things had been happening. And so the rover's got to be smart enough to manage how the wheels are moving, whether one wheel is slipping, move back, figure out a new location, turn, and then take another path. It has to figure out on its own how to get to that location. And so that was the beginning of some of the things that NASA does. Now, in addition to that, we had to program many of our satellites to make observations. When we flew by Pluto in 2015, every image that we took was completely automated. We had to have knowledge of where Pluto was at, and then the cameras were taking pictures and making decisions on what the next set of shots would be. All that was done automatically. And the reason why is, when you fly by Pluto is 4.5 hours light travel time one way. So you send a message, 4.5 hours later, it'd get to the spacecraft. Pluto's that far away. So you can't, it's not like you're going to joystick it. It's got to do everything on its own. Okay. And so we've learned to do that in many ways.
Okay. So very helpful to understand the context of where we were and where we've come. Any examples of, where we are today and where you see this technology taking us? Where, and we don't have to say 20 years later, maybe like 5-7 years in the future, realistically, where are we going to shift?
All right, let me get something. This is a virtual reality headset, the VR headset. Okay. And we use this all the time. We use this in many ways. So VR, was pioneered mostly by the gaming industry, and powered by some fantastic supercomputers, built by many different companies now. But the bottom line is, it enables us to experience space, learn about space, and then execute in space. I'll give you an example. You're an astronaut on the International Space Station, and you're going to get into a spacesuit. You're going to egress outside. Now, the International Space Station is the size of a football field. Okay, it's huge. And you're going to install an experiment on the other end of the space station. So you're going to have to go outside and go to the handrails and translate yourself between the modules and above the modules, and then down and then over. And you're going to have to click in the right place, and you're going to have to learn how to do that. How do you do that? You first learn how to do it in VR.
Wow. Okay.
So you put your goggles on. NASA's got a complete International Space Station in virtual reality, not only on the inside but on the outside. You put these systems on, out you go, and then you know where to connect your
Wow.
handholds.
Wow. Okay.
So I tell you some of the things that they do. So as they watch the subject in the practicing astronaut in the glasses in the virtual reality, they'll push him a little bit, or her too, and that means all of a sudden they miss their handhold.
Mm.
Now they're in trouble because you can't get to the space station. You're flying in space independently of space station, even though you're right next to it, but you can't reach it.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you going to do? So you practice
So
problem things.
Okay. Lots of simulations through the VR set.
Just
Fabulous.
do the simulation. Yeah, right. So
Okay.
so then when you finally execute it, you know exactly what to do, and you do it safely, and the risk is minimal.
Okay, great. So this is a great example of like how technology can be used for training. What else do you see coming? This is a great, beautiful example of VR and how it can help. What
Well,
else?
this technology is used in teaching. So where are the space experts? Well, they're scattered in a few countries that have been doing space activity for decades. So it's the United States, it's
Russia.
in Europe, and there's in Russia. And what are these countries like the Middle East? You know, Saudi Arabia has established a new space agency. UAE has also. Um, um, Portugal, many other countries are coming on, establishing their space agencies. So how do you teach their population, their kids that are interested in doing this, when your experts are somewhere else? Well, you can teach in the metaverse. You can create a virtual classroom and put on your system and walk into a classroom and talk to an expert. And that's one of the things that Metavisionaries do. So last summer, we had the Summer Academy where we taught 15 courses. Each course has 5 classes, and they were all done at a certain time, and we had an expert teach it. So they would walk in, and the teacher would be, you know, a scientist that has found exoplanets, or somebody working on material that's
So you're
come
able to
back.
bring in these experts and sort of, so a lot of teaching, training, space education.
Yes.
What about the actual, like when I'm out there, you told me a little bit about the hardware aspect. Is if you had to give me some sort of, understanding from a, even if not the specific exam number, but just like how much faster are we going to reach in the next couple of years? If we are at X today, are we looking at like a 10x increase in the speed at which we can reach out because of the changes in the hardware technology?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a sense, what's happening.
Well, I think the advances in space are moving at a very rapid rate.
Okay.
It's if you look at the number of spacecraft as a measure of the change in space, it's exponential. We've gone from several hundred to now 10,000 in a matter of a handful of years. It's shot right up, and we're launching stuff constantly. The size of the spacecraft are getting smaller. They're becoming more capable. Many more countries are building them. And so as more countries become knowledgeable about how to do it and want to do it and use those for specific purposes, for not only creating data that other countries can use, some countries have systems where they look at Earth and sell the data because they look at high resolution Earth images, and many countries want them. So that it's actually a business. So it's not free. It's a product that's been developed. So there's many of these things that are going on right now. So that's a measure of how the technology is exploding. Artificial intelligence, AI, is going about it at the same way. That's also exploding. The ability to take in an enormous amount of information, not only quickly because they have supercomputers, but to be able to analyze them, connect things, and then provide responses like in ChatGPT and some of these other systems that are coming about, this provides an enormous benefit so that one can brainstorm, come up with new ideas. Even though some of those ideas may have been out there, the concept that you know all that stuff is it's not possible. And so having access to a computer that can have access to all knowledge in these areas that's available is tremendously helpful. And so, you know, these wonderful AI languages that are coming out, you know, I've used them in many different ways. China has gone to the moon, written a number of papers, done fabulous scientific work, and they write their papers in Chinese. I don't read Chinese.
Okay.
But I can take that paper and give it to ChatGPT as an example, and then read their paper. That, you know, helps blend a mutual understanding. In the past, when the United States and the USSR were doing things in space and then publishing in their individual journals, NASA had to hire translators to translate an article, to read the article and write down the translation, okay? Taking weeks just to get one paper out. Forget that.
So now
it doesn't.
Translate can also just translate for you.
Of course. So there's, you know, but you also at the end of that can say, okay, ChatGPT, find me all the related ideas. You know, who else is working on this? You know, connect me to certain resources in these journals that I don't read or can't read in certain ways. So scientifically, you know, that's an element, one just small itty bitty way that we use this. But it's exploding in many other ways.
Okay.
Giving an example in the metaverse, you know, one of the classes that we teach is satellite engineering. So we talk about what does it take a satellite to live in space? Well, it has to have certain subsystems. It has to communicate. It has to navigate. It has to get power. It's got to have propulsion. It's got to be able to move. So all these are called subsystems. And they have a certain structure. You know, you have a nozzle, you know, you have to have a tank for your fuel, all that stuff. But in the metaverse, once you talk about the subsystems, you literally can bring in what they look like and build the spacecraft in front of the students. This is now moving towards an environment of being able to do what's called concurrent design. The ability to have many experts in different countries get in the metaverse and design a brand new spacecraft and do it quickly. It's very hard to do over time. And typically how you did it is you brought a group of engineers together, put them in a room, and they you know, wrote it on paper, and they did various things. And then they went to CAD/CAM systems where they're trying to connect things, and it's just a tight group, and they iterate and iterate. It takes day after day after day. It takes weeks to come up with a spacecraft design. Now, the experts could be in Germany, India, you know, Washington, D.C., and you just bring them all together, and you then design it in virtual reality. So there's so many things like that are just exploding, and the space industry is just leveraging them.
Okay.
Just leveraging that.
Everything you're saying sounds great as long as like everyone maintains this sort of collaborative spirit that you explained at the outset. You know, from everything I hear, it sounds fabulous, but it all sounds laced with this sense of cooperation, collaboration, sort of we are all one humanity. And it seems like as long as that is maintained and there's sharing of resources, and then the AI is sort of sharing and the scientists are sharing and the knowledge, it all sounds great. If it turns into a sort of space war, a resource war, you know, then I feel like then everything potentially could just completely backfire.
Well, let me mention one thing. Indeed, what you said is true. Okay. We have to learn to work together if we ever have a chance for peace. Okay. And for decades, we've been doing that in space. As we do that, we reap the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So the benefits outweigh the alternative by an enormous factor. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be working together.
Sure. I hope what you're saying.
Space is the place, because that's where it's been.
Sure. I hope what you're saying rings true. Tell me what happens when, you said the number of spacecrafts have gone up and now 70 countries have these space stations and there's all this activity and tourism and all that. How do you manage sort of traffic systems outside Earth? How is that going to evolve into like a new thing where space police, like what is that world?
Well, many countries that are building their spacecraft then launch them in an orbit, but don't have knowledge, don't create knowledge of where all the other spacecraft is.
Yes.
But a couple agencies do. NASA does, ESA does, sure, Russia does. And then we take that information and make it public to them. We say, here, you need to know where all other things are around you, so that you can actually move to avoid collisions if you need to. Space lawyers have got together now and have talked about, well, gee, we better get our act together better than we are now, because we are launching many more things. Now, one of the things that NASA suggested and NASA is doing is for every mission that launches, even the commercial missions from companies in the United States have to have an end of mission plan. And so if I'm a company in the United States and I launch an Earth observing satellite, as the satellite wears out, I'm going to replace it. I get rid of it. I just don't let it die in orbit. I have enough fuel to deorbit it and bring it into the atmosphere where it burns up.
How long does the satellite, how long can it stay on this orbit? Like roughly, just to get an idea?
Well, typically when you put it in orbit, if it's high enough, without what we call drag, if the atmosphere doesn't, breathe, and the Earth kind of breathes up and down with the solar cycle, as the upper atmosphere heats up during sunspot maximum, the satellite's orbits will change with drag. But if it's high enough, they'll stay there forever.
Oh, forever?
There are many orbits. Yeah, there are many orbits where that stuff will just stay there. Well, the key then is if it's junk and it's no longer working, you really need to get rid of it. And so end of mission plans are really critical. The ability to then say, okay, we've got just the right amount of fuel. We now can move it into an orbit either completely out of the way that no one will ever use, or we stick it in the ocean, or we plow it into the atmosphere and let it burn up. So NASA's been doing that. That's worked really well. Other countries are considering doing that. Some of them do. There's also new companies now that are coming along, and those companies will remove dead satellites. And actually, a couple has actually done that. And I think that's another business
who's paying them though? Who's paying, which, like, the countries need to pay them to remove their satellites?
Yes. So the Outer Space Treaty says, I build this satellite, that satellite's mine, whether it's alive or dead. I'm responsible for it. Okay. So another country can't come and take one of my satellites, even if it's dead, and move it without my permission. So that country will say, okay, I need that orbit and that thing is in the way. Let's take it out. I'm going to hire a company to go get it and remove it. And that's a new space business that's taken off right now.
Wow. Okay. This sounds fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours, because there seems like so much going on. But in the interest of time, let's go to the last section of this conversation and then we can close out.
Sure.
I want to talk a little bit about careers, because that's really what the book is about. And if anyone who listens to this lecture, by the way, is just going to be fascinating. Like, I want to be 16 again and be like, hey, I want to go back and do my undergraduate after hearing you.
That's exactly how I feel.
It's also because you make it all sound very accessible. You simplify the concepts And as an outsider to your space, I'm able to follow along this conversation so easily.
That's great. That's great.
Clearly, you're a seasoned academic as well. But now, let's say now you've got me intrigued, and I am intrigued by your conversation. And I say, hey, I want to potentially work in this space in the future. What all could I be doing? What are some of the categories in which I could work in this sector?
Well, as we mentioned, a couple things. As you become more aware of what's going on in space, you need to pick things to do that excite you. You need to pick things where you want to learn and you want to say, this is what I want to do, and you go pursue your dream. So the number one thing to do is figure out what that is. What is that really gets you going?
So what are the options? I don't even know what the options are. So what could I could build a satellite, so I could be a satellite engineer. Like, what are sort of the job categories out there? Or that will
there's so many.
In the future?
Yeah. So engineering, just like science, has a whole slew of disciplines. You can be a thermal engineer, which means you have to manage the heat that's inside the satellite. You've got to be able to give the satellite heat to operate, keep the instruments at a certain temperature so they operate, but then you don't want to overheat them. You could be a power engineer. Power engineers on in terms of building the most efficient solar panels. And oh, by the way, if you build the most efficient solar panels for a satellite, we're going to need them here on Earth because we're going to need those power for our own grid. And so these technologies just blend all over the place. You can be a communications engineer. I want to be able to communicate, and we're moving from big radio dishes now into communicating with light. And it's another fascinating area because light can transmit far more information at a wavelength that's very different than radio wavelengths. That's becoming extremely important. You want more data. I want voice, and I want video, and I want all this. It's better to transmit it at a very high frequency than at a very low frequency. And so you move from radio waves into microwaves and into visible spectrum waves. And so that's a big industry that's going on. So satellite engineering has dozens of subdisciplines you can get excited about and do. Then scientists, there's astrobiologists and planetary scientists and earth scientists. There's so many.
Astrobiologists, what do they do?
They look for life beyond Earth.
Astrobiologists. Okay, that's what they are called. Okay.
Yep. So they study what the origin of life here is on Earth, and we don't know how that happened. And they study what conditions that life lives in. And we find out life can live in some tremendously harsh conditions. But there are a few things that it needs, like water and food. And what is that food? And then where is that in the universe? Can we find places like that on Mars or Titan or Pluto? Or
very big. They're constantly looking for evidence of life outside of Earth. So
that's what an astrobiologist does.
Okay.
So there's many subdisciplines.
Many.
Now, and we talked about space lawyers, but all these
are
people,
the space lawyers first scientists and then they go study, like they get a law degree? Like, is that the sort of, who is this person?
Space lawyers primarily are people that really enjoy and love the law and love policies that work for the benefit of people, and they just get involved.
They're primarily lawyers. They're not primarily scientists who study law.
Right. They're primarily lawyers.
Primarily lawyers.
Now, now for them, it's a brand new field. And so they have to study ramifications of what happens to policies and how countries can work together. So there are people that have wonderful negotiation skills, the ability to work together in teams, and they're needed in the space industry to negotiate different things between countries. We launch many satellites that have instruments from many different countries. Well, how did that come about? we have to work together to figure out, you build this instrument, I'll build that instrument. Let's come together. And
So you
now
need
you
these
need the engineers.
negotiators.
You negotiate those.
Okay.
So there isn't many fields that the space industry needs, all the way, from people that are great in public affairs, telling people what we do, writing press reports, connecting with news agencies. So communication skills are incredibly important. There's just not many fields that can't, if you get excited about it, isn't related in space in some way.
And you said the space tourism will pick up. So then you're going to
Yeah,
people running like space hotels and like
there'll
space
be a space hotel.
space.
So what goes along with a space hotel? A space hospital.
A hospital. Yeah, you're going to have a space school soon?
Yeah, you could go to space and learn. Yeah, you could do that. But I think the order is going to be, tourism is going to drive the space hotel. And as many people go and live, enjoy a vacation in space, there'll also be a hospital. That'll be the next big thing. Now, space hospital is where you go. If you get hurt in space, you go to the space hospital. Okay. Or there's going to be certain things, certain cures that we'll discover that only you can have by going into space and going into this environment and getting that cure. So as we learn more about how the body operates in space, the more we will start approaching the concept of a space hospital as a research facility and as a facility where you will go for certain processes, procedures, medicines as a cure. And
what
you go to space.
In the beginning, where your bone, that environment is simulated, and then you can sort of treat for certain diseases in that environment.
You treat for certain diseases in that environment. And the reason why is, in that environment, your body has certain processes that kick in. It's trying to recover from what it knows. And so some things explode, okay? Some things change so radically. And it's during that time period you can then fix things.
Is there a hospital right now at the space station?
There's several space stations. China has a space station. NASA has a space station.
Do we have hospitals?
No hospitals, but they do have small medical environments in the International Space Station.
Okay.
So they have.
This will be. This is something complete. Are there police stations? Like, is there a regulatory station?
No.
There's no one regulating, sort of keeping an eye out on like a section. Do you see that happening?
No.
Like, is this going to be regulated in the future?
That's a good idea in the sense that that's a concept that will have to be decided on, and the space lawyers will get involved to say, what should or could or what we want to have happen. Right now, I hope there's no need for that. Right now there hasn't been a need for that, but I hope there will be. Okay. Now, in the hospital, let me give you an example of why the hospital is important. I have heart disease. My heart is dying. I'm on the list to get a heart replacement. But what heart am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for someone to have a tragic accident and give me their heart if they die. And then they put it in my chest, and then I take drugs all my life so that my body can adapt to that. And those can be so harsh that it just gives me a few extra years of life, and then I die. In space, we can take out of your bone marrow these stem cells and train them to grow a heart. Now this is an organoid. We're starting the process of growing personal organoids in space.
Well, why do they grow in space? What is that going to do with it?
If you look at the heart's got all these cells. If you try to grow it on Earth, it collapses. Okay. You can't get the form and the shape and you can't get it right. In space, it will grow perfectly.
Zero gravity environment. That's why.
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
So the more we learn about how we grow organs in space, right now we can grow skin in space. So when we grow, so let's say you got burned in a horrible accident and you need skin grafts. Well, what do? Well, they go, okay, here's where you're not burned. We'll just take that skin.
Mm.
Well, you only got so much skin. And so people die from burns because they can't cover the body with skin that the body accepts. But if we take your stem cells and we can grow your skin in space, we can grow the skin grafts necessary. And so skin is also layered, and as we grow it here on Earth or try to grow it, it collapses. So
Mm.
the concept of eliminating gravity enables us to grow organoids in space.
Wow. Oh
So
my.
so one of the basic themes of a space hospital is personalized medicine, personalized organs that can be transplanted in your body.
Is this happening
Now,
right now, or is this a futuristic?
yes, no, we're starting the process of figuring out how to grow Yeah, so there's several experiments that have told us, hey, this is a field we need to get into.
Hmm.
We just grew a meniscus in space. Now you can tear your meniscus in your legs and all sorts of stuff, but to replace it, I want to use you so your body doesn't reject it because it's not somebody else's.
Hmm.
All right. So that worked perfectly. So this is now launching a whole new field of growing organs in space, and so we'll see much more of that done in the next 10 years.
Wow.
So in our lifetime, your lifetime, they'll end up having some sort of hospital up there.
Oh my God. Wow. This is
Would
crazy.
Well, that means we need space doctors. That means we
Of
Okay.
course.
That means, not only do you have engineers that build the hospital, but you got to be able to operate it. That means we're going to need space technicians. That,
Hmm.
everything. So all these disciplines that you can imagine that we have here on Earth,
Hmm.
think about them applying to
Replicate
certain
them.
elements in space. Absolutely.
So it looks like these guys are going to have to get two college degrees, huh? They're going to have to study there. Like, they're going to be doctors or lawyers and then have a very sort of, I mean, they need to know how to operate in space, right? So then they're going to need
Right.
you and Metavisionaries to sort of educate them, train them, equip them
Right.
with this understanding as
Well, once again, these virtual reality systems, the doctors are starting to use these
well. Hmm.
for training,
Hmm.
for operations.
Sure.
And because they're three-dimensional, you end up looking at, when you open a body, you have all these parts and you can look at it in the right ways. You can say, okay, here's the problem. So in many ways, this is already the AI part of it is already being weaved into medicine.
Hmm. Oh, we didn't
There,
touch upon sustainability. Is there a sustainability angle to space exploration? What kind of materials do you use to build these spacecrafts? And is there a movement towards, I don't know, can you build these with sustainable materials? You talked about ozone depletion, and you said that they came up with a fix for it. But what else is happening from an environment and sustainability perspective, and how is that affecting your space?
well, once again, we have finite resources here on Earth.
Hmm.
And so by going into space, it opens up our opportunities to grab other resources.
Hmm.
So,
Have you identified, like, do people know what resources exist and like what is it? What
yes,
is your value right now?
yes. So, some companies have thought, okay, well, there's so many wonderful minerals and metals in asteroids. Let's mine an asteroid, reap the
Wow.
benefit of that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Wow. Okay.
and there's plenty of asteroids out there. And in fact, one of the reasons why we went into space and be cognizant of what's going on in space is that space isn't is we're in a horrible orbit.
Mm.
We're in an orbit where many objects cross our orbit as they fly around and will hit this planet. This
Mm.
is what killed the dinosaurs.
Mm.
80% of life on Earth died from a
Asteroid.
huge asteroid that hit the Earth.
Yeah.
So the question is that was posed to NASA, in the 90s. is, well, what the heck's out there? Is there another planet-killing asteroid out there?
Mm.
And so in the 90s, late 90s, NASA started a program to find all those objects. And so we've been looking for every object that can hit this Earth ever since. And we have quite the catalog. And we can recognize when the really big asteroids, there's about a little less than 1,000 of them that could pretty well destroy a significant number of species on this planet if it hits us. And it's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when.
Wow.
Okay. All right, because you know, space is big, yes, but if it crosses your orbit and then you go by and it missed you, hey, that's great. But on the next orbit, it might hit you. So you've got to know what's out there, and we've been doing that since 1997. So in the future, we're going to have to move some of these asteroids and move them out of their orbit they're in and into another orbit that's safe and doesn't hit the Earth. And one way to do it is hit them and move them. And that's called a kinetic impactor. And we did that last year. The mission was called DART. And this mission hit an asteroid and moved it significantly. And so this was a big asteroid. This asteroid, if it hit the Earth, would take out, you know, Bombay and everything around it. Okay, it would pulverize a significant portion of India.
So you're saying this happens more in the future. You're saying there'll be a lot more.
So we to preserve our future, to keep our life sustainable on this planet, we're going to have to protect it. And we protect it by managing its resources so we can all benefit from it, and managing its hazards. And one of the hazards, eliminating the hazards, and one of the hazards is asteroids.
Okay.
So we now have come up with a way to move an asteroid.
Terrific. Okay.
And we've demonstrated it.
Okay. Only 1,000 more to go, and then we should be okay. But this conversation was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I feel like this space is literally infinite, and I could spend all evening just talking to you, because you're so knowledgeable, and as I said, you made the information so accessible, which really speaks more to your power of just being able to break down complex concepts for just an everyday audience. So thank you so much. I also feel very good talking to you, like just your it's all this, I don't know, I feel like there was this innocence in your conversation, and then the way you spoke about it's all for greater good, it's all for humanity. And I really truly hope that the scientific community as a whole thinks the way you do, and really maintains this collaborative aspect that you really spoke about, because if we do, only then I feel like can we really solve this problem together.
Yes.
If it becomes a rat race, and then if, because it started out like that. It was the USA and then the USSR. And then now you're seeing all these other countries saying, hey, we also want to be like, so, I don't know how this geopolitics is actually going to pan out. There's a reason that Saudi and the UAE are doing this, right? So I don't know at what point the missions get sort of commercialized, or, or the superpower blocks start emerging again. Like, I don't know where it's going to go, but as long as I feel the scientists remain their authenticity, like you seem to have so much of, I'm hoping we're going to be in good hands going forward too.
The key, yes. Thank you so much for bringing that topic up, because the scientists want that. I've never met a scientist that didn't want to collaborate.
Yeah.
And once again, you have to work together to really understand each other for peace to occur. So consequently, the undercurrent of the scientists are like that. Engineers always want to know what the latest and next technology is, and recognize that not all technology is generated by their country.
I know.
So they also want to cooperate. All right.
Yeah, but it's the governments, and then there's corporations, and there's money and
power. This is where space lawyers step in. Okay, and they cleave to the Outer Space Treaty, and work in another network on the peaceful uses of space. Yeah. So right now we're set up.
Right? You said the space treaty was set up in 1960. Now we're looking at 70. Okay, so we're 50 years out.
No, 1967. 67.
Okay. So we're like 50 years or so out, and then
Yeah.
there's so much has changed, right? And now you're saying, it was one space station, two, three, four, and now you're saying there's 70 with 200 countries. It's going to all shift, right? And then the power dynamics have shifted. We're seeing the former USSR bloc, right? So that's all. There's so much at play, I feel, with space. And then when the resource is coming and power, and obviously everyone wants access to data, and satellites are in outer space, the data is then controlled outer space. There's it sounds like there's so many layers to this, from a science perspective. You explained everything. It's sort of so pure. I feel like the way you talked, and your perspective is so pure. But I really hope that purity extends to the ecosystem as a whole, because only then will this, everything you say, really pan out.
Well, all I can tell you is since 1967, it's all held up.
Okay.
So the more we do that, the more we work together, space is the place where peace can exist, and we want to maintain that.
Sure.
Now, as you mentioned, science fiction takes it in all sorts of different directions, but the reality of that is, did you see the movie The Martian?
Yes, of course.
Or read the book?
Yes,
or
yes.
read the book?
Movie.
That is probably the most realistic aspect of what's going on in space. Mm-hmm. It tells you space is hard. It tells you countries can work together for a higher goal, and that's important for peace, not only in space but on this planet.
Okay, all right. On that note, I'm going to close this conversation. This was extremely beautiful. And I've learned a lot. Thank you, Dr. Green, for sharing your perspectives. You also make the space very, very exciting to learn about. And I'm very sure that people listening and watching your video are going to be greatly inspired. And it seems like there's a lot going on. Like I might want to be a lawyer, a doctor, a tour operator, or engineer. There's so many things I could be doing. So thank you so much for opening up the possibilities for all of us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.